Nixon got spanked. Mao, everyone was yelling at him. It wasn't enough to have the best tea. You had to have the water from this particular spring. You'd bring over his kid as your kid, and that became known as a paper son.
Hello everybody and welcome to Tea Time with Jesse. I am your host Jesse, here today with a famous person that you have heard his voice, even if you have not seen his face. Laszlo Montgomery of the China History Podcast and the China Tea Podcast. Or what's it called? The tea? What's
Tea History
The
Podcast.
Tea History
You just
Podcast.
gave it away.
Oh, no.
Oh,
no. Which I have listened to myself and very much enjoyed. I had a long car ride that I was driving to do a show in San Francisco and back. And over the course of those, 13, 14 hours of driving,
You suffered through
I burned
listening
through
to my voice.
quite a bit of your voice. So you are the soundtrack to my road trip.
Thank you.
Laszlo is a fantastic podcast host and Chinese history fiend and a tea guy, clearly, as well. So
Not like you.
but no,
I'm aspiring to your
I
lofty
actually
position.
I feel almost intimidated is not the right word, because I don't want to make that a factor at this table, but just the depth of the tea research you've done. I'm very, as a person that loves tea, you tell all these stories. I'm like, I should have known that. Like I didn't know that. I didn't know that at all. So it's great to be able to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me here. Jesse's Tea House.
Jesse's
Beautiful.
Tea House.
Wow, what a shrine to Camellia sinensis.
Well, we got this. This is just my apartment, but we have this backdrop over here, which we've turned into the whole tea area. So it's great to have you here. I'm gonna start off by making some tea. We'll talk about how you got into Chinese history and podcasting, and I'm gonna start you off with this, which is actually a ancient tree green tea. So this is from Guangxi province, from the Hongyao Zizhiqu, the Red Yao people.
Oh boy.
And it just so happens that I have a friend of a friend of a friend that has the tea trees there, and they were in this predicament, which actually a lot of good tea people in China have, is they have really good teas and they want to try to sell abroad, and they tried to do that and they realize it's impossible. It's just very difficult to get in touch with people, so I figured this actually be a good combination. As we'll start to share their tea with everybody and let everybody get an idea.
Nice.
So, what kind of tea do you normally drink? What's your kind of go-to tea?
Sheesh. I don't have one go-to tea. I have a whole variety and switch in between.
What's in the
Nighttime
rotation?
usually pu'er after
Nice.
3 p.m.
Yep. And then, so you got sort of more night times and more daytime teas. What's a daytime tea for you?
You're gonna kill me for saying this, but I just figured out how to make Hong Kong style milk tea.
Oh yeah,
like the
Been
real
doing the milk
thing,
tea?
like what you'll get at KW Cafe. And,
What's the secret? Are you allowed to tell people the secret?
yeah, just follow the instructions. I thought it was I thought it was something more
More elaborate.
but it really isn't.
The secret is
yeah, great. I tasted it.
is our ancient tree green.
That tastes venerable.
nice.
Smells venerable.
The tea, it's ancient tree tea is very common for stuff like pu'er or even red or white tea now. But green tea, there's almost nobody that makes ancient tree green tea, because it's a very bad business decision. If you age it, it's just not going to be as good. Whereas the other stuff, if you age it, gets better.
What's the optimal stuff for gushu?
Like in terms of
What kind of a tea?
well, the ancient tree tea originally is all with some exceptions for like the Da Hong Pao and the sort of stuff where they have those ancient trees that were man planted. The Chinese tea history is long enough.
Woman.
Yeah, it could be one. It actually probably was woman planted. But the ancient trees, other than those really old farms, some of which you talk about on the podcast, they're all wild. So that's all Yunnan, Southeast Asia, and they make pu'er there. So pu'er is kind of the classic ancient tree tea. So there we go.
The world peace.
Cheers to world peace. That's good, right?
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah, what do you think? This is the ancient tree green tea.
Very nice.
Very nice. This is a pufferfish. He is, which by the way, they should be on the outside so you guys can see them too. That's Big Puff, and this is Fluffy, the sheep.
Oh, Fluffy the sheep.
Yeah, Fluffy's a chonker. I've had a bad habit on my tea house of the teapots just keep getting bigger. I need to keep it in check, but every time I see a big teapot, I'm like, oh, I love it. So it's definitely a trend going forward. So let's get into it. So you have done how many episodes now of the China History podcast?
Something like 400 of
Yeah,
them.
there's a lot. So if you are into Chinese history, definitely one of, if not the top Chinese history podcast that's out
Don't
there.
tell my competitors.
No, we're not going to even mention them. They don't get into this space. This space is for us today. But how did the idea come to make a China history podcast?
Yeah, it started, it'll be 14 years ago this June. Nobody was doing it yet. Podcasting was in its infancy. And it was actually listening. I was watching C-SPAN and listening to how, listening to our government officials and, whatnot, talking about China. I just thought, God, these guys really don't seem to be well informed at all. So if they're not informed, then how much awareness can there be across the country? So I thought, well, I'll start a podcast, make it free lessons on Chinese history, and that was it. 14 years ago, and it doesn't go in any particular order. Just something for everybody. The dynasties, the warriors, the heroes, the scientists, overseas Chinese, and just a little bit of everything. And it's very interesting.
Yeah,
I highly recommend
it.
it.
It's a lot of fun, and I think one of the things that when I first got to China was seeing all the different the architecture and all this history that was just kind of like hidden in plain sight, and being like, somewhere there's an amazing story about why this is done that way. And weirdly enough, you'd see some of these things, like if you go to like a noodle shop in a lot of places, you'll be eating some sort of special style of noodles, and they'll have like a $50 low effort like history of the noodles up on the wall with like a ton of text.
Yeah.
And I would try to read those as I was eating my noodles and trying to parse through all these characters. But like every single aspect of life there, just it's gotten so much history over the years, and there's probably no limits to what you can uncover with the history podcast, right?
I'm certainly not going to run out of
Yeah.
topics anywhere soon. So,
how do you decide which topics are going to be worth doing all the research, and how do you find out this history so you can tell people the story?
The topics generally come from listeners. I have a long list of hundreds and hundreds of topics. But someone will say, hey, why don't you do this or do that? And it's like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. So those tend to just get prioritized, and most when you look at them in the last year at least have all been listener requests. You can't go wrong.
No.
Listeners are
they know what they want to listen to.
Yeah, they know what they want to listen to. So
do you find that they make good suggestions? Are you ever like, yeah, that is a good idea? Or are you generally
I mean, I would go to trouble to make a show out of it, so I guess they're good ideas. And the one I'm working on right now is was somebody. I was talking to somebody. I don't know, they were sort of like you, an educated guy, knows a lot about China. And we were talking about U.S. immigration, and asked him about paper sons. And he had never heard of what a paper son was.
What is a paper son?
Do you know?
I actually don't. I'm trying to think through. The paper son.
Well, I don't want to reveal it.
No,
now.
I know. I really want to
Listen
know.
to the episode
I
when
want
it
to
comes
know.
out. Yeah. Well, in 1882, after years of anti-Chinese protests and demonstrations, and really coming down hard on Chinese immigrants living here. Some of them were even born here. They came out with the China exclusion laws, the first of these laws, which were meant to keep Chinese out of the country. To
Literally
them.
called the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Yeah.
So it was pretty upfront about what it was doing. So they start coming out with these laws.
Yeah, so coming out with the laws, and it made it very hard for Chinese to legally immigrate here. And in 1906, you had the San Francisco earthquake and fire, which destroyed all the records. So all the birth, death, marriage records, anything about citizenship, everything was destroyed in that fire. So all of a sudden, you can be undocumented. And you can just go to the government. If they try to deport you, you can say, hey, wait a second.
Oh, that was the fire.
I was born here. And they had no way to refute it because all the proof was all incinerated. So this allowed undocumented illegals really to get that citizenship, and then would allow them the rights to bring their children over from China because they would be a U.S. citizen and have a document that probably was received fraudulently, but.
Well, I mean, this is the thing when you see it with immigration all the way to the modern age. When you don't allow people to go and immigrate formally, any number of things can happen, and that pressure kind of like releases itself.
Yeah.
So so this time period, what made you so interesting about this process? Was it like the people that were coming over and getting citizenship? Was it
No, it was just a whole subculture that existed, and those who brought their children, and they weren't even children. They basically, if you were obtained it, if you obtained this citizenship, you could say, I got a couple of kids back in China. I'd like to bring them over, as my right is. I'm a U.S. citizen.
So one of your kids is like 3 years older than you. It's like,
Or they might not even be your kids. That's the thing. They might not even be your kids. You might not even have any kids. You might not even be married.
I had heard that. But
somebody else in your neighborhood has somebody they're trying to get over here, their son. So you would sell them your slot. That right that you had to bring over one of your kids. So you'd bring over his kid as your kid, and that became known as a paper son. And they would have to grow up
in the
outwardly as your son, but really he doesn't share your surname. He is not your son. He belongs to someone else.
It probably created
thousands and thousands and thousands of these paper sons.
Wow.
And they lived in the shadows, just like you see today with, here in our very own Los Angeles, with so many undocumented immigrants trying to
figure out how
get
to
that paper,
be in the society without being able to formally be in the society.
So it's a big issue. It's a big issue in this year's election, but it all began
with the fire.
With the exclusion
laws.
Well,
That was the exclusion laws.
Creating this whole dynamic.
Well, that was the thing, is as I was saying, like
people living in the shadows.
When you have and whether it's something like big like immigration or even just like knowledge about China from people that have been going back and forth. One of the things that COVID did was it stopped people from going back and forth for a couple of years. And it was kind of funny towards the end of COVID. I personally felt like the lack of people going back and forth and correcting rumors or like being able to confirm how things were actually going, it got really hard to figure out what was happening in China.
Yeah.
Even for someone like with me, where I have lots of WeChat friends and I can kind of chat, but it was hard to figure out because not everything's on WeChat, and the actual in-person of what day-to-day things were like, it got very difficult to tell when you don't have people going back and forth. So when the borders, whether it's for immigration or even just travel, get restricted, we literally lose track of what's going on in the world, even in the digital age. So you do a bunch of different podcasts, but the history one is the one that's been going the longest.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first episode you ever made of the history podcast?
Yeah,
and
sure.
what it was about?
Yeah, it was I did one on Qin Shi Huang.
Okay.
I did it in my living room, my home. My home is like ceilings like this. I don't know how high
Like
that
high
is.
ceiling,
It's a high ceiling, all wood, and no rugs on the floor. It was an echo chamber. Sounded like talking in a church. And I had my Mac sitting next to me, and I'm just talking into the built-in mic.
Well, that's the way you got to get going, especially people.
It's a start.
But also, like 14 years ago, like a little mic system and a Bluetooth connector, like this stuff would have been $2,000. 14 years ago. You're
none of the tools that we take for granted now in the podcasting biz were available. So it was that. Now I go back occasionally and re-record these old.
Oh yeah, well that's a good thing about having a script is you go back and re-record them. So you did on Qin Shi Huang. Give everybody maybe a little brief explanation. Who is Qin Shi Huang?
Qin Shi Huang. He was the first emperor of China. He was the king of the state of Qin, and from about the 8th to 3rd century BC, you had the Eastern Zhou dynasty, and the second half of that was called the Warring States period. And Qin was one of these 7 states vying for control of all of China. And this king, Yingzheng from Qin, he conquered the other states and unified them all, and that's where we get the first. China as an empire, as a unified nation from north all the way down to the south.
And so even though the empires have split, or there have been periods of time where there's different people ruling in different areas, kind of like you would say like that's the point in which like Chinese history becomes China as a state, and then continues. Is that accurate?
Yeah. The culture and everything was all developing in the Zhou, but that really was what was really brought to greater heights in the Qin and in the Han, and but really the Qin is like where you get the first Chinese state, as opposed to these regional states. In Shandong, you had Qi, you had Lu, and every province was really. The present day borders weren't the same, but they were all individual states. So Qin Shi Huang, big guy in Chinese history.
Big guy in Chinese history. So what attracted you to say like a character like Qin Shi Huang? Like what was, when you were reading the research about Qin Shi Huang, what really made you say like, wow, this guy?
Well, I'd studied Chinese history before, so everybody knows him. He wasn't the George Washington of China, but he's a George Washington type figure. It's like, okay, everybody knows this guy. He was there at the very beginning. So
did you learn anything about his life that surprised you in your research?
If I did, I don't remember it, but he had he had a very interesting life. None of it could be true, but whatever was written down by the grand historian.
Well, so that was before Qin Shi Huang. I know that in future dynasties, like rewriting the history of the last dynasty was usually the first thing that the new dynasty did, right? So like they want to have control over the narrative of what actually happened when things switched. But in that first sort of unification, who was in charge of writing then the history of the Qin after?
Well, that would have been. That would have been whatever the court historians. Sima Qian was in the Han Dynasty, so in order to pump up the Han and make them look like the great savior, you had to dump on the Qin and show where they went wrong and why they fell, and subsequently why the
Han emerged.
Why the Han emerged and really saved the day and made China a better place, even though that he adopted all of the pretty much the same architecture as Qin Shi Huang. So
the when you read about these historical characters from Chinese history, like they are very far away from modern day Los Angeles or something like that. What makes you so eager to go back into history and deal with these people and characters and places that are far away from your everyday life?
Yeah, it's history. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be China. It could be any history. It's just that's what's so fun about it. It's so filled with so many interesting characters, fascinating characters, and so it doesn't really matter. That's the best part of it. Is, just learning about all these guys and the times they lived in.
Mm-hmm. When did you? So you lived in China as well yourself, right?
I never lived in China. I lived in Hong Kong.
Okay.
During the lead up to the handover, I was there from 1989 to 98. I left a year after the handover.
Oh wow! What was it like being in Hong Kong during the handover?
Oh, it was a sense of something very historic was happening. All the negotiations for the Basic Law. They were building the airport. There was all the talk of what was going to happen in terms of Hong Kong and China's relationship in the years to come. And it was a very, you knew you were living in historic times. And it was the Deng Xiaoping era. It was a really, those were great years. I was just there in November.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, had 4 fabulous days.
That's great.
Yeah.
How many of your old friends from the Hong Kong days are still there? Are there still people back from your circle who are living in Hong Kong or the handover?
Yeah, mostly all the Chinese guys.
Yeah, sure.
I just talked to one the other day.
That's great.
Yeah. Some left, but most of them have stayed.
That's great.
Yeah.
No, it's what kind of tea do they generally drink in Hong Kong? I know they drink like the Hong Kong style milk tea. And is that the kind of the main type of tea that you're going to get in Hong Kong?
No. I mean, when we go out to different, one of my closest friends out there, whenever we go out for dim sum, he'll always order a shou mei, which is
nice.
so I developed a nice taste for that. I like that.
Nice.
Not choosy.
Yeah, it's good. There's definitely a lot of people I know in Hong Kong that bought up a lot of pu'er and a lot of teapots back when the mainland was less
after
developed.
The Olympics.
Yeah, after the Olympics, and then the period now the thing has switched where when I went to Hong Kong and to Taiwan, they say now the mainland buyers are coming back and they want their old teapots back. They want to buy the pu'er back. So in some ways it's actually kind of good because they bought and held on to this stuff for a long time, so they're actually going to probably make a lot of money on it. But then on the other hand, it's like kind of funny, like all the good pu'er is going to be leaving, and they don't grow that tea there, so they can't make any more of it. So
I worked for Chinese factories pretty much my whole career, 35 years, and whenever people would come to the U.S. on a business trip, or if I would go there and see them, they would always give me.
Yeah, they always give you some tea. Do you have any tea that you?
I have so many qi bing.
Oh, that's qi bing. We got the big tea.
I mean,
that's the real way to get the old tea. If you a lot of times people are like, "How do I get old tea?" The real answer is to go on a business trip to China 30 years ago and have somebody give you some, and then you just hold on.
How should I be storing that?
Just not near any strong smells. So if it's surrounded by chilies, it'll wind up smelling like chili.
Okay.
But generally, just like you see in the paper, just keep it out.
I have it in a paper in a box, hidden somewhere in my office.
It's probably good as long as it can breathe. You don't want it completely wrapped in plastic because then it's not going to have any oxygen to come in.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have it in plastic.
So yeah, but that would be an interesting episode. Maybe we should do another episode where I go and check out some of your
I'll bring some of them over.
Yeah,
you can tell me, this stuff was...
This whole episode was
everybody got this.
Yeah, this was a whole ruse just to figure out how to get access to your old pu'er tea case.
Yeah.
But so you were kind of on the in China, in Hong Kong right at that time, and then you've come back here and you now are doing the history podcast. Do you have a recommendation of an episode, if you're going to say like, okay, this is one that would be a really good one for you to listen to, and why would you recommend people listen to that one? I know you have a lot of episodes, so it's,
but I would say, well, it depends. Who am I recommending this to?
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I started the China History podcast, this is at the infancy of podcasting, I only envisioned an American audience. So it was meant to be a show to teach Americans. Because I thought, gee, we're so terrible when it comes to this stuff. Yeah, so, so for Americans, I think I've done several shows that concern Chinese American history and U.S. China history. So I like those. There's one that's on the story of when the United States first met China as a country. You know, U.S. have been involved in China trade as smugglers and whatnot. In the going way back into the early 18th century, but in 1783 was when the first trading ship to China sailed from a U.S. port as the United States of America, not as a colony of Britain, because during the colonial era, the British East India Company had a monopoly on all trade in the Far East. So even though any merchant from Boston could have gotten on a ship and sailed to China, they weren't allowed to. But they did anyway.
Yeah. But as their own official country.
But as a country, 1783 is when they first went there. They got there in August 1784, and that is the beginning of U.S.-China relations, even though relations weren't carried out by diplomats, they were carried out by merchants, which isn't always a wise thing. But
so what happened when the first merchant ships from the United States reached China?
And China, so who are these guys? Let me see this flag again.
Yeah, what's that flag?
Stars, stripes. They thought, they look like these Brits over here. We'll just call them.
They were probably like, where's them in the like why were you fighting? You all. You speak the same
Yanks,
language.
they showed up, they didn't bring any gifts with them, and it was just a complete...
So did they make a mission, try to reach because that's more of a diplomatic thing, bring gifts for the emperor or anything like that. They didn't do anything.
They didn't know the drill, they had to learn it by doing it. But they figured it out. So that episode about the first time the U.S. and China met as countries, and the immediate aftermath of that. A lot of the early millionaires and in the U.S. came from making their fortunes in China trade. And
weirdly enough, it's not all that different than what we're doing literally right now.
Yeah,
figuring out a way to get tea from China over here. I wish it were easy enough that you just make $1 million, you load up one ship, and then you're just set for life. I don't think it's that easy. But
they would put you out of business.
Yeah, they would put me out of business.
Yeah. So that's one of my favorite episodes. And then there's another one I did when I came out with my 10-year anniversary. I did a story, basically U.S.-China relations from 1969 to 72, which is the backstory of the lead up to Nixon's visit in February 72 and the immediate aftermath.
Wow.
So,
which must have been
a great story.
Actually, I really want to listen to that episode too, because the Cultural Revolution was crazy. And so what was kind of the initial interaction between the Americans and the Chinese during the middle of the Cultural Revolution? How did they get that channel set up?
There was nothing set up. Whatever was found out surreptitiously from secret sources in Hong Kong or Taiwan or whatever spy agencies could figure out. But the United States, Nixon, decided when he became president that one of the first things he was going to do was normalize things with China. And it's just the whole, how everything was done through all these back channel methods. And the actual lead up and the moment it happened. I mean, it's just I don't know why nobody has made a movie.
You gotta write the script. You got the podcast. You have the story.
Especially in the context of today's strained relations.
I was going to say, do you look now at the strained relations now and say, okay, well, it feels bad because it used to be better, but actually at least we're still set up? Or are you like, wow, we really are back to the old ways of doing things?
It's so funny. You know David Moser, right?
Yeah.
So I remember writing email to him back in like 2018.
He's a mentor of mine, professor at Beijing Capital Normal University, and the person who originally introduced me to Ding Guangquan, my xiangsheng master, who I later apprenticed to and gave me this fan. So, but David Moser, big titan of the
number one
Beijing community. So you wrote an email to
we always keep in touch, and I said, God, back in 2018, I said, God damn it, relations between the U.S. really going down. This is really getting...
What could happen next?
Yeah, now, when I was writing, and then I'll write him, I go, God, you remember 2018? Those were the good old days.
Good days. At least you could still get a direct flight across without paying $2,000 or whatever.
Yeah, so, this series was a 7-part series. It was about a 6-hour series. It was done in the context of, I did this in 2020, so 4 years ago. I said, U.S.-China relations really in a horrible place, but here's this story of when Nixon went to China in 1972, and you'll see we hated each other back then too, and still we figured it out. There was leadership in China and in the United States were willing to make these difficult choices that were sure to get a huge backlash. I mean, Nixon got spanked. Mao, oh man, everyone was yelling at him. What are you doing, talking to these imperialists? For the last 20 years you've been railing against them, and now you're talking to them. So both of them, there were very difficult choices to make. So this...
Can you give an example? Like, what were these difficult choices? When you say they're difficult choices, what was it that was hard about establishing the relationship?
Well, for Maoism,
dealing with
the United States was like the great Satan. But America's good in many ways, bad in many ways, but no one will say that we're particularly Maoist. Yeah,
we're not very Maoist country.
Not too much. It hasn't taken off.
Not really.
It hasn't taken off here, but So to have an enemy that horrible that you're now inviting their leader to come to your country and to fet him in the Great Hall of the People, and it took a lot of guts to do that. But there was leadership on both sides, and that's why I'm saying for now, with Xi Jinping and with President Biden, and if he gets reelected or whoever the next president is, they got to make these,
there's some tough,
very difficult decisions. Where we need to back off or lighten up, then that's what we need to do. We have to look at the bigger picture, and that's what Mao was looking at. And our leaders of today need to also look at the bigger picture.
It's tricky because the challenge with the U.S.-China relations is, like, weirdly enough, it's one of the few things that both the Democrats and Republicans agree on, is to not be too good to China. And so it's a weird situation because my whole life, has been, I never lived in a period where the two parties actually worked together. I grew up in giant gridlock forever.
You're not born before 1979?
No, I was born in 1990. So
shoot,
so I'm I guess a youngin.
2 years older than my daughter.
Yeah, so it's funny to think of what would this is one of the weird moments in life where I actually see what happens when both parties agree on something, and it happens to be agreeing on something that I think is, which is definitely causing at least a lot of problems for me in my life and my social sphere. The inability of the leadership to be able to make those decisions and talk about these things in a realistic way as opposed to a political way.
Yeah.
This is not a politics podcast, though, so we'll
in general.
But in general, I think that I actually do like this a lot because I think what do you think about this as a history person? I think we oftentimes think of ourselves as better than the people from the past. We'll figure it out. But they had to go through their own versions of challenges, and the ways that they solve them can be illuminating for the ways that we can solve stuff going forward as well. Would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, there's always models in the past. I mean, certainly looking at Mao, Zhou Enlai, Nixon, Kissinger, you look at them as models. I mean, they had their own crises going on in their own countries, and yet still they figured out how to, bring this relationship to a new level, or to leave that one behind
and restart things.
Yeah. So with the China History Podcast, it's always been, listen, learn. If you're going to hate China or you're going to have some strong anti-Chinese feelings, at least do it for a reason. Coming from an educated, experiential point of view. Don't just hate China or anybody or anything just because,
That's part of the thing.
I read in Facebook.
Exactly. Or like random articles. Like it always is crazy because there's a lot of people who will, when I tell them I lived in China or whatever, they'll have very strong opinions, but they're not particularly based off of anything. It's not based off of any personal experience generally because they haven't lived in China or gone to China. It's not really based off of any cultural experience because they're not very tied in with any Chinese community in America. And yet people are very confident. And so it's exactly as you said, if you learn the history, if you learn the language, if you learn the stuff and you still think that things are bad, well, actually that's something to think about because you've put in the time and energy to think about it. So anyway, we're going to take a little bit of a break. We're going to restart and do some new teas. And we're going to talk about some more fun stuff that you've been doing in terms of collaborations with other countries, with other institutions, continuing the Chinese history, keeping the Chinese history train running into the future.
Okay.
So
take a break.
Yeah, take a break. I'm Jesse.
Laszlo.
Yep, and we'll be right back. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Tea Time with Jesse. I'm here today with the China History Podcast creator, Laszlo Montgomery.
Thank you.
Many of you will have heard his voice, even if you have not seen his face. What's it like being a voice person?
A voice person?
Do you like the anonymity?
With this face, it's good that I'm a voice person. I don't get out there. I'm not like you. I don't get out there too much.
You're getting out there
guy.
Today. Let's go. We
like
definitely
stay hidden.
Appreciate you coming over to the tea house today. We're going to start the second part of our discussion, talking more about Chinese history, your collaborations with some museums and groups abroad, and also the book that you've come out with. But before we get into any of that,
what do you got?
Tea. So this is the 2017 White Dew White Tea.
Oh, next year.
And it is a great year. It's aged just enough that you're starting to get some of that old white tea flavor, but not so much that it's crazy expensive.
Wash that stuff, would you?
So give this a good wash.
Give it a good wash.
And then, what did you think of the green tea that we just had?
It was good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good.
There we go.
All right. Show me how it's done.
Yeah, so this will get actually quite a bit darker as we get into the extra steeps.
Oh yeah.
Did that smell? That's the good. That's the good white tea smell.
The WTS.
This is the WTS. We got to put that on a shirt. I got to get me some of that WTS. And you can pour your wash over whichever teapot you would like. I'm going to give both Fluffy and Big Puff a little bit here.
I'm going to give this coronavirus.
Use the 疫情查重小病毒小冰冰 We'll get the second steep here to drink. This is from Fujian, and as I was talking about this before we started the second half, you're like, oh, the biggest episode of the History Podcast on YouTube is actually about Fujianese history, right from this area.
Chinese.
So tell us about that episode. What was that episode about, and why do you think people had so much interest in it?
I don't know. I guess I just have a lot of Hokkien listeners in Southeast Asia.
Explain to people who don't know, what is Hokkien? Who are Hokkien?
Is southern Fujian. Hokkien is just means Fujian. I'm not pronouncing it correctly as they would in the dialect, but those are the people from Zhangzhou, Xiamen area around there, Quanzhou, and they make up a big part of the Chinese diaspora, a very accomplished people.
Yeah, there's a lot of, you said, the diaspora, they're like very well represented. There's a lot of the earlier immigrants to other places around the whole world, right? All came from that part of the country on the coast, and they have some of the best tea, specifically white tea, from Fujian.
They invented white tea.
So we got to thank our Hokkien, Minnan friends. Very nice.
Wow, yeah, that's a very interesting taste. Very nice indeed. I like white tea's my favorite.
Yeah, white tea's really good. I mean,
even though you didn't ask me, or did you?
I asked if there was anything you wanted, and you're like, oh, whatever you want. But then when you mentioned white tea,
I don't want to come to your beautiful tea house and say, give me some da hong pao.
That's exactly what you should do. I mean, we have da hong pao if you want it, but you gotta tell me what you like. This is a part of my job as a tea host, is always trying to suss out what people like. So it's if people don't know though, white tea is actually a really good choice.
Yeah.
Because white tea is just kind of nice, clean, crisp, sweet, but a little bit of the herbal flavor in there.
Yeah, and healthy too.
Very good for you. White tea. We're all big white tea fans here. So you recently just came back from Europe.
Not recently. No,
it's the internet. People don't know. People don't know.
Yeah.
You came back yesterday from Europe. And what was it like? You were in London. What were you up to there?
I was only in London.
So maybe I shouldn't say you came back from Europe.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't get hate on that. Oh, I just totally stepped in it.
Yeah. Back in 2019, I was invited by the London Science Museum to come out there to collaborate with them on an exhibition. They were collaborating with the Palace Museum in Beijing. They were bringing over a collection of Zimingzhong, the chime clocks, those very elaborate chime clocks. And then COVID, and then UK-China relations, always something happening. But finally it happened, and it opened on February 1st, and it's still going on right now. It's at the London Science Museum.
Nice.
Till June 2nd.
Nice. So if we have listeners in London or in the UK in general, good place to go check out. And so what part did you play in this collaboration?
I helped to promote it through my show, and I went out there and interviewed the curators of the show, and just was part of all the excitement going on behind the opening.
What did you think of the pieces that they were able to display? The clocks, can you give a
beautiful
description of
what
a
lot of them were made in England. Yeah, Kangxi, Yongzheng, Qianlong. They loved these clocks. I mean, Matteo Ricci showed them the first ones, and they just, for some reason, at that time, in the early 18th century, it was such a wonder.
Those clocks are a marvel. It's like, for whatever reason, whenever I look at like watch technology or pocket watch and that sort of stuff, how early they were making those extremely high precision things, it feels like the technology would have like been 100 or 200 years advanced of where you would think it would be, right? It's like it really is a marvel. And I went on a deep YouTube hole once when I was living in China, but for whatever reason I got really into watching people build whole clocks by hand. And so they would take the brass plate and they would individually cut exactly 53 gears into that one and 131 into that one. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I mean, the precision necessary, and these are hobbyists. You can imagine the actual expert, clockmakers and stuff. So Chinese, those the people you had mentioned, for people who don't know, Qianlong, Yongzheng, these are Qing Dynasty emperors. So the emperors always had a history of having the best stuff.
He always got the best stuff, the
they
best
gotta have the
tea
best stuff.
also.
Best tea, the tribute
All that
tea.
gongcha.
Yeah. And so what is, maybe explain to people a little bit about gongcha and the tribute tea and how that kind of comes into the tea history.
Oh, I believe this was back in the Tang, I think was the first gongcha. Yeah, it just was tea that was, it was the best of the best, and the emperor had people that were go out throughout all the tea producing regions and get the best stuff and bring it back to wherever the emperor resided. And yeah, the emperor always got to drink the best stuff. Sometimes even the best water too. They had to bring the water with them.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it wasn't enough to have the best tea. You had to have the water from this particular spring.
Even back then, they were like Beijing tap water, not so good. But well, sometimes that was a big part of it, though. Is like it's about the entirety of the thing. So they would literally take pitchers and they would fill them full of water and bring back cisterns of this stuff. That's crazy. But like it's funny. Like I keep telling people, they're like, "What brands of tea should I look?" You gotta have a tea guy. You gotta have a tea guy. Even the emperor is like, "I'm gonna find my tea guys that are gonna go out and search for the stuff and bring it back." It's not necessarily just like okay, we just get the same brand every year.
these teas, these gongcha that were reserved for the emperor, these became known as famous teas, and really all the great teas of today, the great names that are the most renowned. These are all former tribute teas. That's how they gained their repute in the industry.
Because once they're good enough for the emperor, then they're good enough for everybody else.
You and me.
Yeah. So that whole system of the tribute teas, it really plays now even into the modern day, because as you said, like these areas of the country that are known for producing tea, they were known for producing tea back then. And even sometimes you said they would make like tea gardens that were meant to be for the emperor, right? Mm-hmm. So what do you have an example of any sort of? What's your favorite example of something crazy that happened because the emperor wants that tea?
The story of Qianlong in the bush at Longjing, where their bush, the tea leaves that would come off of these bushes that he specifically planted, that those would be only reserved for the royal palace and for his consumption. That was always a great story. Yeah, the Longjing story or stories behind that particular tea. Always
tell one of the your stories.
Come on, you got to listen to. I'm going to tell all these stories.
No
one's going to buy my book.
No, they're going to buy. There's a lot still in there. You got to give us some of the juice. What's your favorite Longjing story? Because
Longjing story. Okay, Longjing story. Qianlong was down in Longjing, and he heard. Someone got word to him back in Beijing, right? His mother was ill, and he was very close with his mother, and so he cut his trip short, and he still had some of the tea leaves that were presented to him at Longjing, and he had them in his royal sleeve, and he went all the way back up to Beijing to go see his ailing mother, and he didn't know it, but he had these tea leaves still in his sleeve, and because of that they had been pressed flat, like what a classic Longjing tea bud looks like. And he took this tea, served it to his mother, and she made the comeback of the century, and he honored this Longjing village and all those Chanong, and that's how Longjing became famous.
And that's one of those things. Is like those.
He was a major influencer.
Yeah, he was a big influencer. The emperor had a lot of followers.
Yeah.
It was sort of like the.
You get a lot of free stuff too.
Exactly. That is true. The emperor does get a lot of free stuff. One of the perks of the job. A lot of the things, like, because Chinese history, the emperor has so much power. It's like they really can shape the entirety of even like lives. How many lives nowadays? Like, I'm going to Hangzhou. By the time this airs, those videos may even be up. Like, how many of these people's lives to this day are spent growing this tea and preparing it in this way because of the impact of, like, you know, one emperor in the way that they drank their tea many, many years ago. It's kind of a weird thing, you know? But this is also why when I look for the famous teas, obviously for some teas, I think there's definitely a reason, even in the modern day, that's good tea still today. But a lot of times you'll find these areas that are not famous, but they still have great tea. They just were never endowed by any given emperor. And so that's also one of my goals, is like, I have a unique place maybe in the tea world, because Chinese people are never going to buy the 9th or 10th most famous type of tea. Mm-hmm. But like, if it's good and it's tasty and we can get it for a good deal, people here would try it. Mm-hmm. So it's actually in many ways almost like an opportunity to open up new areas that, like, if I have confidence in my own taste and I go there and I taste it and I meet the farmers and it's good and we can put it in a bag, why not? Get it over here. And then maybe one day, whatever, hundreds of years from now, people in America are going to drink one random tea just because it was on the channel or something like that.
It can only happen to you.
It could only happen. It's the world is a weird place. The garden of forking paths is deep, but it's so you when you think about making an episode of something, whether it's a history podcast or the tea podcast, do you kind of find these stories and base the episode around a collection of stories, or how do you think about telling Chinese history in a way that's actually going to be interesting and entertaining for people?
That's my secret sauce.
Yeah, okay.
I can't reveal that. God,
that's I'm asking the too good. The questions are too good. But like, what are you comfortable revealing about this?
It's like anything. When you have a passion for, like, your passion for tea is what drives you to be able to speak so articulately and passionately about this subject and about what's good and what people should try. It's the same thing with history. It's just you have to present it in such a way that makes it compelling and relatable. Anything from ancient or whatever period. If there's some way to tie it to the present, I mean, I'll always do that. I mean, there's always, that's what history, the lessons of history are, so important to try, and especially when mistakes were made, to try not to repeat those mistakes. We can say, okay, well, I remember this happened, whatever, in the 1700s in such and such a place. This isn't the first time we're seeing it. Yeah. There's so many of the hotspots in the world. They have historical.
I mean, the argument over those histories are still fought over today. I mean, whether they're literally fighting over the history or whether history is used to justify the fighting, that kind of goes both ways.
Yeah, but people need to learn the history, especially when you're looking at in terms of, with Gaza, in Israel. There's a whole history behind that, and it's people feel very passionate one way or the other, but you need to understanding the history will make things a lot easier to understand, and you understand why people are so passionate like they are.
Do you feel like when you were working with the museum people in London, because we touched briefly on the museum, but like, what do you think as a sort of personal, you have your own style of doing history stuff. What was it like to work with people in a museum that were like professional history people?
As opposed to me?
Oh no, you're a professional in your own thing, but you're not affiliated with any giant museum. Like, like it's a difference between, like, sometimes comedians will do stand up and then they go into a writer's room and they're like, oh, this is a different culture. Even though it's both comedy, even though it's both history, what was it like what did you see about the way that they did the exhibit or the people that you talked to that kind of gave you a new perspective on being a history guy?
Oh, I just was very impressed with the professionalism and the depth of knowledge of these curators. I didn't know anything about museums until I got to know, Lee Moore. He does the Chinese Literature podcast. Great show if you're interested in Chinese literature. And he got his PhD in museology. And it's like, museology, what the heck? Yeah, there's a whole science. It's a branch of knowledge. And how to set up museums and how to curate them, and make the most effective, find out the most effective ways to present history through objects to the public. And there's really a lot that goes into it, and I didn't know anything about it.
Like, what was one thing that surprised you about what went into it?
Oh, in this display, the way they had it all tastefully set up was usually, you could see it, it's like in a case and you could just sort of stare at it, but every single clock was in an individual case. So you could walk totally around it too, and you could just see everything. And the way they explained it was very well, English and Chinese. It was very well
Really
done.
cool.
Hear about it for so long, and then to finally see it, and they were a great bunch of people.
I guess that's the other good thing about being with history people is, like, if there's a 4-year delay in doing the project, that's kind of okay. Because they're thinking long term about these things. Like, this thing is 200 years old. It doesn't matter too much to the exhibit if it's 204 years old, or something like that.
So anyway, it was a very educational thing. It really harkened back to a time in China history when, Britain was knocking on the door and trying to establish relations, and you could see how things sort of didn't really get off to a good start. But if things had worked out differently during this time, maybe what happened in the 1830s, 40s, and beyond, maybe might not have happened. So, the famous thing, Japan embraced, the West, Western ideas, and when the 1790s, when they knocked on China's door, they said, not for us. And,
I wonder, it's definitely one of those great, like, alternate history questions of all
what
time.
if?
Because, like, even thinking of just Japan, much smaller country with a much smaller sort of, like, social sphere of influence, to think of the strength that they wound up putting together and ultimately, losing the world wars. But, like, the modernization that took place in Japan, can you imagine if that had happened on the scale of China? Like, what it might have looked like?
I know.
It's hard to even...
With that tradition, people say, today, look at China, it's this manufacturing, giant. It's like, God, it was the same way in the Song Dynasty too.
Well, this is the sort of thing you look
manufacturing back. is the history of manufacturing in China.
There's a lot of history.
This
is one of the things I tell people.
Very good at that.
The sort of in a way of trying to explain how Chinese people within China see the rise of China, is to explain to people, like, at any given point in the last 2,000 years, up until, we'll say, the Opium Wars or something like that, you could basically make an argument at any given time that China is the most advanced civilization in the world. Yeah, and so it's not saying it is or it isn't, but it's right up there with the best that anybody else in the world is doing for basically the entirety of recorded history.
And consistently, from ancient times up through modern times. It was just a steady stream of one polymath after another, and a great scientists. I mean, we won't even talk about literature, but just science and technology, just one after the other. You could go from dynasty to dynasty, and they all had these great minds, great scientific minds.
Is there one person from, like, that you've discovered through your historical research that maybe you didn't know before but fascinates you now?
I can't think of any, but there's so many. It's one of those things. There's so many, I can't think of one.
But like, there definitely is that sort of advancement. And I was saying in terms of the point I was making was when people say, like, oh, whatever, China's rise, or China wants to be a superpower or whatever. In a lot of people in China's mind, China was continually a superpower forever, and it's only a very recent blip that it wasn't in that context. And so it's just a perspective that it's like, I'm not telling you that anybody should or shouldn't agree with that, but I think it's like a reasonable perspective supported by the history to be wondering, okay, if in absence of war, or an absence of famine, people should probably expect that China is going to be a player in the world. You know, like that's kind of the way it's always been. It's a pretty safe bet
to take.
And so it's not so much a question about whether that will happen. It's a question of like, how does that power now interact with the rest of the systems? And that's kind of been where the conflict has always been.
Yeah.
Determining, because especially the difference between sort of Westphalian, every state is independent, and a tribute state system, which is a completely different way of tribute states. The hierarchy is very transparently not equal. It's like there is a tribute power, there is a lower power, a higher power. It's a very different way of looking at the sort of international relations. Obviously now China's not formally a tribute state, but back in the
Back in the day.
Back in the day. So, do you feel like when you're going to write these podcasts now, kind of in the new modern kind of like pool that we're swimming in when it deals with China, do you change the way you're writing or thinking about, talking about, or subjects you pick based off of the sort of rise in antagonism between the West and China, or are you just like, I'm in this for the history?
Yeah, I'm totally in it for the history. One of the things, if you read some of the comments about me, and whether it's a YouTube channel or iTunes or what's it called now, or Apple Podcasts. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like it that people say, yeah, this guy doesn't bring his politics into the show. You can't tell. Is he a Democrat? Is he a Republican? Yeah. Is he a Trumper?
That's like
what is he?
It's also like weird. That's like weirdly powerful in the current system. If you can make good stuff that people actually listen to, and you're not doing it from, and there's not to say advocacy is bad, but not as a straight up like advocate for any one particular cause. It allows people to kind of come in and view it more neutrally, and they actually like listen to what you're saying.
Yeah, it's like I'm in it for the history. I'm not in it to convince everybody. Oh, Xi Jinping, he's a nice guy. I don't really do this for anything except presenting the history, and the way I present it. I'm not trying to make anybody look good or look bad, and people could read into it however they want. But it's a history show, and I'm not trying to convince anybody anything except that Chinese history is worth studying, and for on a number of levels, but not least of which is just to try and get a better understanding of the way everything is today in our world. What the dynamic is, and when Xi Jinping says the Great Rejuvenation, it's like,
what does that mean?
What does he mean?
What is that? Yeah.
To actually know that, hey, listen, this was for the past, at least couple thousand years, one of the greatest civilizational places in the world. And
there's a lot of stories that
there's so much to say.
Enough stories to write a book, perhaps?
Yeah, possibly. Tea. There's certainly enough to write a book on tea.
Well, what would that look like if there was a book on tea? Would it look kind of like
here
this?
It is, ladies and gentlemen.
There it
is. Get the picture.
Yeah, so this is the History of Tea, Book 1.
Yeah. China
History Podcast transcripts. Get a kind of a look at what it looks like generally. I hope you don't mind people getting one free page.
Graham Earnshaw, one of the great old China hands. He came to me, was it last year, and said, hey, have you ever published your transcripts? I said, I'd really like to. Ever since the beginning, I'd always get emails from people in China and other countries, but mostly China, saying, I love your show, but you speak too fast and you're using too much slang. If only, I had the transcripts, I could get the comprehension. My comprehension would go up.
So these are basically word for word, the podcast.
The word for word.
Book form.
Yeah, so you could see there's QR codes. So if you scan that QR code, it will take you to the episode for that chapter. And there's all these timestamps in there, so you could always know where
you're at.
where
So
you're at.
are you thinking of this as something that you encourage people to read while listening to the podcast together?
Yeah.
That's
You
cool.
can either do
I like
it on two levels to up your English comprehension if you're a non-native speaker, or just if you just want to read it and you don't want to listen to my voice.
Yeah, I feel like this guy's the worst part of what he makes.
Oh, that North Shore
that
Chicago
guy.
accent is driving me nuts.
So if you're like into tea, but don't like people from Chicago, then that's perfect for you.
Yeah.
I think it is really good though, because I really do think that when people like see my channel, it's kind of funny because I'm giving people, a lot of them on the internet, their first time really thinking about tea, especially Chinese tea, is coming through and interacting with the videos.
Yeah, learning about it.
But the videos are, because of the nature of the media, it's short. You can't talk about too much in depth. Mm-hmm. It also, it's one of the reasons I like doing this podcast, is you can kind of get into a flow of things as opposed to be like, hey guys, last time I did this, and just like blast people with information. But you have to, because if you don't blast people, somebody else will. Being able to read it in a more, it's all very good content, because I remember listening to the audio, but it is a lot of names and peoples and places and having, even for me, speaking Chinese, it's difficult sometimes to keep track of the who and the when and the why, because the names are so confusing. And I can imagine if you don't speak Chinese, anything with a Q and an X in it's going to sound pretty bizarre. You're not going to remember.
When back before the 18th Party Congress, when word on the street was that Xi Jinping was going to be the next leader, I was thinking to myself, oh, geez, the news organizations are going to have a field day with
my
this.
favorite thing that happened regarding Xi and his name was there was a reporter in India who had to introduce him for an event, and she introduced him as 11 Jinping, XI. Isn't that great? Isn't that great?
Even I was listening to Jordan's China Talk show the other day, and he had Rahm Emanuel on. Even Rahm Emanuel, ambassador to Japan, he calls him Xi. It's like, come on.
Yeah, Xi. Yeah, we gotta do like.
I mean, I think if you're above a certain level in government, you gotta learn how to say that name right.
Well, but there's so many countries. Like you can do that for even the president. It's like that's true. But like the names are, and those letters are actually hard to pronounce. That's the one thing I found as a language learner. You can learn grammar. You can learn whatever adjectives. You can learn all the words. You can even learn comedy. But one thing that is difficult to do is if your mouth has not made those shapes since you were born.
It's tough.
It's gonna be hard. It's weirdly difficult to be able to make those pronunciations correctly.
Easy.
So
like life itself.
Which is why you have people who live in America for many, many years that are completely fluent English speakers, but they still have an accent because it's always going to be.
Look at me, all my years in Southern California. You could take the person out of North Chicago.
Yeah, but you
can't get rid of this Chicago accent.
Chicago. I'm lucky I don't have too much of a Boston accent. I have a little Boston in there.
You don't sound like you're from
really
Boston at all.
Boston at all. I guess I'm.
How do you say chowder?
Chowder.
Okay.
Yeah, or chow. Yeah, actually, yeah, that kind of came out, didn't it? It's But anyway, the tea book is excellent. The podcast series is excellent. Should definitely recommend you guys listen to the History of Tea podcast, China History podcast. Take a look at the book.
You haven't said much about the Chinese sayings podcast.
Is there a Chinese sayings podcast?
That's my real labor of love.
That's the real labor. So tell us about the Chinese sayings podcast.
The Chinese sayings podcast.
You're a whole podcast like kingpin. You got a whole thing running.
The Chinese sayings podcast is a show that every show takes one chengyu, Chinese saying, and it breaks down where it came from, where's the source, what is the story behind it, and they're all rooted in history. Almost every one is rooted in history with historical persons, or sometimes they're made up. But and these Chinese sayings, it's something very unique to China. They're all, not all, but mostly 4 characters long. And in these 4 characters, which again are all coming from texts from thousands of years ago, 2,000 years ago, and they will be like a kind of a slang term, like an idiom, to describe a situation. So you could say it in a whole paragraph, or you could just use these four.
Yeah. If you know the right Chengyu at the right moment, it can express so much perfectly. Although I had a joke on that. I was joking about how I rarely use Chengyu in real conversations with people because I found that like no matter how I use it, the conversation immediately just switches to the fact that I used the Chengyu.
Yeah.
So like it's hard to say anything.
Some of them are showstoppers.
It almost feels like I have a little box with a red button on it. And whenever I press that red button, I can make Chinese people go like, "Oh, chicken the Ejidala, chicken the Ejidala, chicken the Ejidala." So it is a process. But if you are a subscriber to our Tea Club, you may notice that those cards, we give a card with every animal. The Tea Club is Zodiac themed. Mm-hmm. So for the sheep. For the sheep cycle, we'll have a Chengyu that has young in it, and we'll find a story to be able to tell people, and then we make a little English language, very short version of the explanation of the Chengyu, the story, and then kind of what it means in modern day. So there's plenty of Chinese history. We're definitely not going to be able to get to it all here. But before we get going, because we're just about out of time, I want to do a little quick lightning round. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions, no more than one sentence answer. Doesn't matter if you're right or wrong or whatever. Let's just try to get them out, okay?
Shoot.
So yeah. So first question. What is the most your first question? What is the most interesting dynasty to you?
I don't know. I'll say Qing because it's so recent to my time.
Great. If you could go back in history and live in any Chinese dynasty, which one would you live in?
I have a major hygiene issue, so can't be too far back. I wouldn't have mind living in 1920s, like warlord era Shanghai.
Oh, that would be a lot of fun, actually.
Great music.
That was hopping. We had a guest on who was a jazz musician, and he talked about how back in the day they would have American jazz musicians.
I did an episode on that. You got to listen to my Whitey Smith episode.
Yeah, that would be a good time. There'd definitely be good jazz. Continuing on, lightning round. We'll say favorite tea area. Where is your favorite tea or favorite tea area?
I don't know. My best tea drinking time was in Chengdu, so I'll just go with that. You can get anything there anyway. You walk into any tea shop, it's like Jesse's Tea House.
Get it into the show. And then finally, if you could recommend sort of one historical figure that you think most people may not know about from Chinese history, but is worth looking into or listening to your episode on, what figure would you recommend?
I'm going to go with two, and one was the successor to the other one.
Okay.
And I did a 8-part series on Zhou Enlai, and I think I did also an 8-part series on Deng Xiaoping, and more than meets the eye. Incredible lives, people that had so much impact on their country's development and history and in the greater world history.
Nice, very cool.
So a couple of recent ones for you.
That's good. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's really great to be able to see you here. As always, we'll have the links on the in the description for some of the podcasts and shows in the book. And it's just we've been thinking there's got to be some way of doing some sort of future collaboration as well, especially with all the great tea information and research that you've done. I think that's it's very exciting for me. I love listening to it as a tea person. I'm sure you guys will as well. If you are new and you have somehow made it all the way to the end of the podcast and don't know
who listens to the
end of this stuff, but all of the tea that we drank today, the tea tables, the teas themselves, the tea pets, even the tea towels and the tea cups are all on jessesteahouse.com. I'm Jesse. This is the Tea House. And it's all really good stuff. We have it in the United States. We'll ship to you within 2 days. So we get it in the mail within 2 days, and then if you bought 4-day shipping, it'll be 4 more days. But we can get it to you quickly. We're not sending them one at a time from China. We have it all here. It's already through. And it's a great way to get started and also support the channel so we can have more amazing guests on to be able to talk tea and Chinese history. So that's basically it for me.
Oh, thanks for the invite.
I appreciate it. It's a lot of fun. It's great to be able to see everybody and enjoy it. By the time this comes out, I'll probably have already shared some of my China content from my most recent trip. So go over there, check out the green teas, including the green tea we drank in the first half of the show. That is up on the website right now. So
whew, that's a long goodbye.
It's a very long goodbye. We're done. Thank you so much. Have a good one, everybody. I'm Jesse.
Oh, Laszlo Montgomery, China History Podcast.
And we'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.